The small folk are kind of a big deal in this episode, hence the title, but also claiming a dragon turns out to be as dangerous as it sounds. Aemond finally gets some dialogue and fires Alicent. People are bonding over their trauma, while Daemon almost leaves Harrenhal. Hey everyone, I'm Mariana, this is Impression Blend, and welcome back to another House of the Dragon episode breakdown and review. As usual, I'm talking about everything that happened, what worked, what didn't, how it all compares to the book Fire and Blood, and I'm answering some of your questions as well. Spoilers for this episode and everything leading up to it, but as usual, no spoilers for any of the future events from the book. Let's get started. As an overall opinion on this episode, I think it was definitely an improvement on episode 5. There are a lot more things coming together here. There were a few scenes I absolutely loved. There was some much needed character development and world building. So while there are some very valid criticisms to address here, we're definitely moving the story in the right direction. That being said, at this point, it feels like episode 5 and episode 6 could have, for the most part, been one episode. Between the repetitive Black Council scenes, the way the Harrenhal plotline has been dragging, and some of the King's Landing stuff as well, I understand why I keep seeing people say the pacing feels off. This isn't even an issue with lack of action. Every fan of this fantasy universe knows that people talking in rooms are often some of the best parts of Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. The problem is more with how stagnant certain characters feel and the inconsistent pacing. I would also argue that the gaping charisma void left by the departure of Otto Hightower, the incapacitation of Aegon, and the removal of Daemon from the rest of the characters is really hurting the overall quality of the episodes. At this point, it's Gwaine Hightower holding down this fort of charisma, and I'm grateful for it. He is unexpectedly my favorite new addition to season 2 as far as characters go. On the other hand, there is something to be said about expectations as well. I can't fully blame people who were promised a show about a Targaryen civil war full of betrayals, blood, and dragon fire for feeling let down because they aren't getting enough of all that. There is a lot more of that on the way, to be sure, but when I see viewers say that the show is kind of dragging its feet, I understand where those comments are coming from. These next 2 episodes are going to make or break this season. Is season 2 going to be remembered as something that peaked halfway through only to fizzle out towards the end? Or will we get a second payoff that will make all of this build-up worth it, and more importantly, that will give people a reason to wait potentially another 2 years for season 3? I'm obviously hoping it's the latter, especially knowing how insane things get in the book, but we'll see. Let's talk about episode 6 though. We open with the Lannister army arriving at the Golden Tooth, 8,000 men ready to march. Shout out to Jason Lannister bringing a freaking lion along and having 10 out of 10 armor. I love the Lannisters and their shenanigans. Plus, all of this is happening with a version of the Reigns of Castamere playing in the background. Excellent. Please let that lion eat someone later. But if you're wondering what the hell is the Golden Tooth, it's the seat of House Lefford. It's right here, very close to the Riverlands. The Lannister army came from Casterly Rock over here, seat of House Lannister. They're joining forces with House Lefford, and the idea is that they're going to march to Harrenhal, where Daemon is, while the Green Army and eventually Aemond and Vhagar are going to come from King's Landing. So Jason Lannister sends a raven to King's Landing saying they're ready to go when Aemond joins them on Vhagar, but Aemond is not a fan of being summoned. He's also not a fan of listening to people's advice, especially when they're saying he's wrong about something. He straight up talks over Alicent at the council. He tells Tywin to make an alliance with the Triarchy to try to deal with the Black blockade, even though multiple people tell him that those people are not to be trusted. He sends Criston Cole and the Hightower army to Harrenhal without giving him or his men time to recover, and he finishes off with,
I say we're all agreed.
"That's not how I read the room, but okay." After the meeting is over, Aemond proceeds to remove Alicent from the small council. She didn't want him on the council when Aegon was in charge, and now he doesn't want her on his council. Whatever power she had left at King's Landing is now gone. Meanwhile, Team Black propaganda orchestrated by Mysaria is proving effective. At the inn, Madame Sylvie and Diana gossip loudly about the supposed feasts the Greens are having at the Red Keep, while the small folk are starving, which goes nicely with the side of sheep being taken to feed the dragons, while the vendors run out of meat to sell. This eventually escalates into riots, but we'll talk about that later because first I want to talk about a few more important things that happen at the Red Keep. There's a second small council scene where Aemond continues not paying attention to what's going on with the small folk and is also a jerk to Larys, which is surprising. We established that he's supposed to be a calculating and smart character, and while this could be interpreted as Aemond putting Larys in his place because he knows exactly who he is, it also seems foolish to treat Larys this way. But whatever, let's pretend he's somehow oblivious to what Larys is capable of. More importantly though, we learn in that scene that Aegon has regained consciousness.
Not happy news.
Aemond immediately heads to Aegon's chambers to intimidate him and to see what he remembers. Aegon says he remembers nothing, but I don't think I believe that. I think Aegon says what he needs to say because he's scared of his brother. Aemond instructs Orwyle to keep him comfortable, which seems to imply that really he just wants Aegon to be kept sedated on milk of the poppy at all times, the way Viserys was. Alright, let's talk about Aemond because last week in my previous video, I was concerned that Aemond was becoming a one-dimensional villain, and this episode is kind of confirming that. Some of you seem to agree with me, saying he is pure evil and that he's being evil and unreasonable for the sake of being evil and unreasonable. Sammy29987 says he seems to be pretty clever at times, albeit flawed, but turning into a prick 100% of the time, not a fan. On the other hand, Striker163 feels that Aemond isn't getting enough screen time, saying, "I don't actually feel like they've portrayed him as pure evil in the scenes we have with him, but I feel like he needs 1 or 2 more scenes per episode." See, I would have agreed with that earlier. I even mentioned his lack of screen time in my previous video, but episode 6 had plenty of dialogue for him, and that did not change my perception. Don't get me wrong, Aemond has always been a pretty unhinged character, and he is viewed as a villain in the book, but the reason so many fans of the show find him interesting is the context House of the Dragon added to his character. Right now, it seems any humanity he had is completely gone. I'm hoping to see some more dimension and reason back in his character soon, but at the moment, it's not looking good. You know what was good to see though? Alicent finally starting to come to terms with how she failed her children. We see her by Aegon's side saying, "I'm sorry." We hear her wonder if Daeron seems to have turned out to be a better person than her other sons because she didn't raise him. She is definitely at a very low point at the moment, but this makes me hopeful for her character growth. We seem to be building up to some major moment for Alicent, and I'm very curious what that is. The scene between her and Gwaine in particular was one of my favorites of the episode. Alex Nad wants to know what I think about the relationship between Alicent and her brother Gwaine and the mention of Daeron. I think it was so important to see some warmth again between the Hightowers. We have definitely been missing that this season compared to how much more of a family the Greens felt like in season 1. It was also great to learn a little about how these characters grew up, what the dynamic was like, and how they view Otto. Not only is this important for Alicent's character, but it's also a great scene for Gwen, who I really hope will stick around for longer. As for Darren, I can't wait for this character to be introduced, and just like a lot of other book fans, I'm hoping they do him justice. They're making him sound like the perfect prince in this episode. He's smart, he's hardworking, he's a musician and a fighter, and most importantly, he's kind. They're kind of making him sound like Rhaegar Targaryen now that I think of it. And let's not forget, he has a really cool blue dragon. I also want to talk about the scene between Larys and Aegon, which was fantastic and probably my favorite scene of the episode, which some of you agree with. I loved the insight into Larys's personality and where he comes from, how he was treated as a child. That little bit about his father blaming sorcery at Harrenhal made me wonder if Alice Rivers was involved. This seemed like the first time we actually saw something very real about Larys. His emotion seems genuine, his own pain coming to the surface as he talks to Aegon, the way they connect as two broken people. I've seen people say that this is just Larys being manipulative and sinking his claws deeper into Aegon, but I don't think I fully agree. Currently, Aegon is bedridden, and everyone knows that Aemond has plans to remain in charge, so there is very little power or influence for Larys to gain here at the moment. Also, when he says,
"And they will underestimate you. And this will be your advantage."
This is genuine, solid advice from Larys's personal experience. He tells him he's in danger. He tells him his mind is all that remains for him because he will never be whole again. And while it's easy to liken Larys to Littlefinger from the main series, I think in this scene there is a surprising amount of Tyrion in him.
I have a tender spot in my heart for cripples, bastards, and broken things.
At the end of the scene, Aegon asks for help, and I think Larys will be willing to provide it. Honestly, this was all beautifully done, and I'm really wondering where the show is going to go with this dynamic and mutual understanding between the two of them. But let's turn our attention to Harrenhal, where Daemon is still tripping. This plotline, I think even the die-hard defenders of it are realizing that it has gone on for way too long. But you know what? I actually liked it in this episode. Hear me out. I still think this has been needlessly repetitive, and they should have given Daemon more to do in the Riverlands instead of having him spend most of his time hallucinating. The balance is way off, but this time around, we actually get some character progress thanks to the return of our favorite king, Viserys Targaryen. I was so glad to see Patty back for a couple of scenes. I was hoping this would happen, but I'm not going to lie, I was worried at first when they started just redoing this scene from season 1 pretty much word for word. But then the show actually does something interesting and reframes that interaction from the perspective of Daemon being uncomfortable with emotions and vulnerability, layering this idea that Daemon leaves when he doesn't like something with his guilt of not doing enough, not being able to protect his family enough, which he keeps buried deeply within him. This is what I've been telling you guys all along. Those of you in my comments who have been telling me that Daemon is some twisted manipulator who has been after the Iron Throne this entire time. Daemon has his problems, but he is not Aemond, and he has always been loyal to his family. He wants to be important. He wants to be feared. He will act out to literally get attention, but he will always be there for his family, and he will not betray them. This Harrenhal arc really culminated in two ways: his second scene with grieving Viserys and having to ask Alicent for help. Daemon has always seen needing help as a sign of weakness, and that second scene with Viserys has him accepting vulnerability and needing support as part of being human. but also giving support as an expression of love. Just really powerful stuff and a big moment for Daemon's personal growth. Finally, this Harrenhal side quest makes sense, as imperfect as it was. As for Alice, she stops him from leaving, telling him he's trying to yet again run when he doesn't like something. Even if the list of things he ran from is debatable, it makes the necessary point. I've learned to take a lot of what Alice says as things Daemon needs to hear rather than things that are necessarily 100% true. In this case, he learns to accept that there are times when someone knows how to do things better than he does, and that asking for help is actually the smart thing to do. It is hilarious how he resists at first.
Daemon Targaryen asking for help?
Counsel.
But he does listen and he does ask for help, and while he is our next character to be told to do nothing for the moment, Alex takes care of Lord Grower Tully, who finally dies after she apparently volunteers her healing skills to help him, which will now give Daemon the chance to win the River Lords to his side through the young Oscar Tully. And by the way, that owl in the scene combined with the dialogue was giving me skin changer thoughts about Alice. Did any of you feel the same? I actually do like the idea that Daemon needs to learn that the same approach to winning people to his side doesn't work the same everywhere. At first, I was a bit confused why Daemon, who definitely has experience being a leader and convincing people to join him, as well as inspiring loyalty, would suddenly be so bad at this in the Riverlands. But you know what? I think this not only makes sense because people are different across Westeros, and that's an important thing for a leader to understand, but it also adds to the world building overall. So yeah, Harrenhal this episode was actually good, even though I am glad that we seem to be finally done with Daemon losing his mind. I need Daemon and Rhaenyra on the same side. I like the idea of them being a power couple, and I am over Rhaenyra thinking he turned against her. We've seen and heard throughout the series that they are two halves of a whole. They balance each other out, and together they can be unstoppable. Daemon, I think, will be walking away from Harrenhal ready to recommit to Rhaenyra, but Rhaenyra seems to be going in a different direction, which is concerning, and I'm really hoping for a big reconciliation scene before the season ends. But what's going on with the rest of Team Black? Well, Corlys has now officially accepted the position of Hand of the Queen. He's wearing the pin, he's ready to go. Still no heart-to-heart with Rhaenyra about Rhaenys. I think we can forget about that. Corlys also names Alan of Hull as his first mate, which is a pretty big deal, and later in the episode, we see Alan shaving off his silver hair. He's doing his best Jon Snow, I don't want it, as much as he can, while Adam nothing but wants it. Listen, they need to give all of these characters some personality. It's the same thing with Adam and Alan as it is with Hugh Hammer and Ulf. They're just there for us to put a pin in them, but I really need the writers to step it up and make them into actual characters. Anyway, Rhaenyra volunteers Stefan Darklyn as a potential dragon rider candidate, and this doesn't go well. I love the scene though. Another standout of this episode, they try to set Stefan up with Seasmoke, Laener's dragon, who clearly has some personality, and it was so cool to see the ritual with the dragon handlers chanting, the same song Daemon was singing to Vermithor in season 1, mind you, giving commands, guiding Stefan as far as what to do, but things get a little toasty to the horror of everyone watching. And you know what? Let me just read you this quote from the book. "We shall not pretend to any understanding of the bond between dragon and dragon rider. Wiser heads have pondered that mystery for centuries. We do know, however, that dragons are not horses to be ridden by any man who throws a saddle on their back." Seasmoke apparently already had a rider in mind because later in the episode, we see him go after Adam of Hull, pretty much dive bombing him on that beach. I'm not going to lie, the first time I watched that scene, I thought it was unintentionally hilarious. I love the idea of showing a dragon choosing a rider instead of the other way around, but something about the way it was shot was just off. I will say I'm very disappointed we cut away before we saw Adam actually claiming sea smoke. This seems like such a strange choice. Like, how did he go from being terrified to actually climbing on this dragon's back? How did his first ride go? This is the first time we see a character on the show who has never encountered a dragon up close or been prepared to claim one become a dragon rider. This is such a big moment and it has huge implications for the rest of the story, so it baffles me that we didn't see it. As for any of the questions why Adam specifically, the most likely explanation is that since Adam is Corlys's son, we get a clear confirmation of that in an earlier scene, this makes him a half-brother to Sea Smoke's previous rider, Laenor, and the dragon senses that. This isn't how claiming dragons always works, but in this case, they kept mentioning throughout the season that Sea Smoke was lonely, missing his rider, so here the dragon chose someone with the same blood. And speaking of dragon lore, we also learn there's a wild dragon roaming in the Vale. George R.R. Martin disagrees, but the show has its own ideas. Rhaena stumbles upon some scorched land and sheep as she's walking around with Joffrey, and this can only mean one thing: the presence of a large dragon. Book readers will know him as Sheep Stealer. I'm not going to elaborate further on this. All I'm going to say is I think we can officially say goodbye to Nettles. This is a beloved character from the book that so many of us were hoping to see, but I just had a feeling that they were going to give her storyline to Rhaena, and well, that's what it looks like. It looks like that's exactly what they're going with. I get the decision from the show's perspective. They have merged storylines before on Game of Thrones, and they really didn't have much else to do with Rhaena at this point, so I get it, but it's still a bummer. As for Rhaenyra, she's out there on Dragonstone slapping people who say "I told you so," even though that guy technically wasn't wrong, cosplaying Visenya with a sword, getting really annoyed when someone mentions Daemon, and plotting with Mysaria. I find it interesting that Rhaenyra continues wanting to model herself on the problematic warrior queen Visenya, but is still seemingly waiting for everyone's approval to do so when Visenya would have needed nobody's permission to do anything in Rhaenyra's position. But on top of that, Rhaenyra's simplistic view of strength and leadership, still being a warrior with a sword after all this time and everything she's seen, it's just weird to me. The writers have an opportunity to give more dimension to this and to write a more layered and nuanced idea of a ruler here, regardless of what comes next in the story, but they choose not to. I don't know why. This also comes through in the conversation Rhaenyra has with Jace, who seems to have no problem with Rhaenyra being a ruler and his mother, but for some reason this concept does not sit well with Rhaenyra. What else doesn't sit well with Rhaenyra? Jace reiterating they need Daemon and his army to succeed in this war. Look, I get that from her perspective, it's annoying to keep being reminded of this, but once again, he is not wrong, and this is exactly the reason she asked Daemon to marry her in the first place. Why is she now interpreting this as Jace doubting her when it was meant to be a joint venture to begin with? But this conversation gets interrupted by Mysaria's mysterious
"A gift is sent."
And get this, apparently they have sent unmanned boats of food to King's Landing with Rhaenyra's banners. How does that work? I have no idea. Do they just all naturally float that way? Are they drone boats? And why is nobody paying attention to all of these random boats arriving at the bay? Clearly nobody's watching Blackwater Bay, even though Dragonstone is like right there, so I don't know why they don't just take King's Landing from the water with their Valyrian fleet and all. But whatever, this sparks riots because the small folk now see Rhaenyra as their savior, since they kind of forgot it's her blockade that's that's making them starve to begin with. I mean, one of them literally exclaims, "She thinks of us even now." Okay then. The riots catch Alicent and Helena at the Sept, which they should have just stayed in, but the White Cloaks decide to get them out, which quickly escalates things when someone's arm gets chopped off. The two queens barely escape, and we get the feeling that this is definitely the start of a major shift in the mood at King's Landing. But keep in mind that so far, both sides see the small folk as a tool to manipulate and use to their advantage. Will the people eventually realize the royals are using them no matter which side they're on? That remains to be seen, but this scene was excellent. It was intense. It was important. It's too bad nobody's going to listen to Alicent if she tries to suggest paying attention to this. And honestly, I actually wish this part was longer. Side note, notice Hugh Hammer punching some guy to steal his food. Until now, he seemed like your average, hardworking family man, but this was unexpectedly harsh. Meanwhile, at Dragonstone, Mysaria continues being Rhaenyra's biggest fan and helping her in every way she can, telling her everything she wants to hear. She's been doing that for the past few episodes, but it really comes through in this one, and Rhaenyra is definitely appreciating the support. One of you asked, what are your thoughts on Mysaria in general? Should she have gained the trust of Rhaenyra that easily? Personally, I have never fully trusted Mysaria, and I don't think you're supposed to. Just like Larys, she has always been shown to serve her own interests above all else. But also, just like Larys, she seems to have a big vulnerable moment in this episode. But here's a big difference. While Larys is attending to a king at his lowest point, Mysaria has everything to gain from being useful to the queen at the moment. Now, I'm sure there is a sincerity there, and I'm sure she admires Rhaenyra's resolve to continue her fight for power. But do I also think Mysaria knows exactly what she's doing? Absolutely. Mysaria tells her how she got the scars and why she can't have children, which actually contradicts what she told Daemon in season 1. Back then, she said she ensured long ago that she would never be threatened by childbirth. Could she have been lying then? Yes. Could she be bending the truth now? Also yes. I don't think we will ever know, but the main takeaway here is that back then, her goal was to be safe and liberated, and it still is her goal now. Did she suddenly turn into someone 100% loyal and sincere? Only time will tell, but at the moment, I can't fully trust this. As for the kiss that the internet seems to be so obsessed with, I thought it came out of nowhere, and considering that it wasn't in the script, it makes sense why it feels like it came out of nowhere. It is a beautiful scene of the two women bonding over trauma and hardships, but could it also be interpreted from the perspective of Mysaria using every tool she has available to her to get closer to Rhaenyra for her own gain? You let me know what you think. In any case, their intimate moment gets interrupted because Seasmoke has a new rider. Could it be the Greens? Could it be Laenor coming back? Rhaenyra isn't going to wait around, and she finally gets on her dragon to go find out, which is such a tease, ending right when things are about to get even more interesting. Do I think this was a perfect episode? No, I don't. But I do think people are being unnecessarily harsh on it. A lot of that comes from getting impatient with certain storylines, as well as the realization that we waited for this season for 2 years, and now we only have 2 episodes left until we have to wait again. Episode 2 had some great personal moments for both teams, some important character developments, and some great looking dragons. Yes, Rhaenyra's arc is still slow, and so is Alicent's, but I think both of them are heading towards something big. For Rhaenyra, her increasing resolve and sense of righteousness fed by Mysaria could be a dangerous combination when dragons are involved. For Alicent, being stripped of her power power leaves her facing the results of her actions and needing to rediscover her resolve and her connection with her family. Things are heating up with the small folk, new alliances are being forged, armies are marching, more dragons are joining in, and we are definitely close to something major. But what did you guys think about this episode? Let me know in the comments below. And if you missed my review of the previous episode, I have it right here, ready for you to watch next.